Hi everyone, this is the first episode of the Monomania podcast, and so appropriately we thought we'd start with the topic of starting something new, whether that's starting a new painting, a new drawing, starting any new artwork. So George, I thought I would start with you because you recently told me that you had a sort of period out of painting after having felt a bit frustrated with the whole practice, and you spent about 2 years not really painting as much, and then you came back to it. I wonder, given that sort of extended period of time, did you feel more pressure when in the moment of starting a new painting? Did it feel more daunting? Did it feel perhaps slightly more, daunting than it usually did before?
Yeah, definitely did feel more daunting, but what made it easier was that I did it completely in secret. I didn't show anyone. After like 2 years, I didn't actually know it was going to be 2 years. I was just like, I'm not painting until I know what it is that I'm going to go forward with, what I'm going to begin with. And then, yeah, I started again.
Mm-hmm.
It just happened when I moved to a new place, and I kind of re-established my life, and in doing so talked to myself about what is it that I'm obsessed with. And annoyingly, the thing that I realised that it was, I didn't like, I was a bit embarrassed by it because during my A-levels, my tutor came up to me and said, I've got all these artist references for you, people that are like, focus on relationships and that draw their lovers, or like, and I was like, why are you giving me that? I don't want that. It's got nothing to do with me or anything that I like or I'm interested in. And she was like, oh, and I just completely rejected it. Because for me, that was not, I wasn't accepting that was something that I was interested in. And then when I admitted to myself that all the portraits that I've drawn, all the things that I'm constantly, or used to be constantly painting, were based on my obsession with trying to understand the relationships in my life. So I was like, okay. And I looked around, because I didn't want to go back to portraiture. And I started to see relationships between objects in the room. Whether it's like the relationship between these two chairs or something like that. And then that was my starting point. And yeah, to finish saying why it wasn't so scary was because it was completely in secret and I didn't show anyone.
So the pressure was kind of made easier because you weren't telling anyone that you were doing it. It was sort of just without any kind of expectation or any judgment, that kind of situation. Do either of you feel like you relate to this idea of, because I feel like when we're talking about this topic of starting something new, the idea of the blank canvas is so often associated with maybe like a fear or something can be very daunting or difficult to get past. Do either of you two sort of relate to that idea of the blank canvas as being something that can be particularly daunting? Have you had experience of that?
Well, I think when I paint, I start off with folders of images and use them as I suppose like a reference point. But I think as the painting goes on and I work on it for longer, then I start going less and less back to these references. Relying on this intuition, and that's just from going like really understanding the painting, because I've I understand the marks now and what's gone into it. So I suppose it's just a matter of time.
I mean, I find when it's empty, it's quite nice. You have like a few certain rituals almost when you start. I think that's often kind of takes away the sting of a new thing. So
and so you have kind of rituals for like how you start a painting, which means that you can kind of how you're going to approach it when you first start it. Do you ever worry that like over ritualizing the beginning process slightly stifles some of the kind of freedom of the kind of creative freedom whilst doing it, or is that not something that you worry about? Do you need that? Do you need those rituals just to get going?
Yeah, well, I don't know. A ritual is quite fun because they are, you just make it up. So it's not like a rule or a law, But sometimes it's quite nice to have ownership over your own rituals rather than following one like a doctrine from someone else, because you can adopt and you can change it.
Yeah.
Well, what
yeah.
are your rituals? Like, what are the...
Well, it's not like, you know, a mantra or anything, but it's like, you know, little steps that you take, whether it's like going for a walk somewhere.
Do you guys feel like you have a kind of ideal emotional state that you would like to be in when you start painting? Or is that not something that you can control? Is that something that's too idealistic? But do you like to have a kind of, I want to be in this emotional state when I start the painting? George, how do you feel about that?
I think, yeah, I want to feel a little bit crazy. I want to be like, this is going to be this, and I want to have it all like round in my head. Or as if I'm like very chill, I don't think much comes out. I kind of got to work myself up, like ramp myself up. To get into like this little frantic mood. Bill does things in the middle of the night.
I'm like that as well. I think I like it because obviously, if you're painting something that's quite literal or representational, there's a tendency to think of it on like in a traditional sense. So I try and like jar it or like distract it by. I like listening to weird music that makes me feel really strange, like Boards of Canada or Aphex, like weird stuff, and you're like, oh, I don't know how to feel it. But then like it changes the way you make the marks rather than it's just. I guess also like a way to distance yourself a bit.
I mean, same for me as well. Like I use music as a way to like zone in and really get into the really get into the painting and like not have any distractions at all. Put on like noise cancellation and just like zone in, and I think that's like when I feel like most confident in my painting is when it's that like feeling of I'm not having any distractions around you.
Do you ever make playlists because I find I like to, like you were saying, you have like a library of images. I'm like that with the music as well. There's like a period where I go for a walk between where it's like urban and then it gets to like weird countryside stuff. And then when it starts getting the weird countryside stuff, that's when I play the music. Cause I'm like, I'm going to enter this like strange realm.
Oh, that's cool.
Like, and then you add to it as well, but it's quite nice to get into the zone beforehand, like we were saying, I guess, but.
So where you are in the painting is where you are in the playlist.
Yeah, well, sometimes, yeah.
Is that what you meant?
Or like getting a sense of sounds in your head. You did noise cancellation, so sometimes just like nothing, just like your sound like.
Oh well, I mean, in terms of like playing music over that.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean.
What kind of music?
But it varies. I mean, I like music without too much like lyrics and because I do think that is a bit of a distraction. But I'm into like beats and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, maybe that's reflected in the work. But I mean, I'm not consciously, like subconsciously, it's reflected in the work. I think, but
well, I see that in your work because you told me about reference images that you use, and like the reason for you using so many and maybe like collaging them in your mind is to just come away from like your referencing being literal, so you're like looking at color or like a certain shape. So like I think you saying that thing about not wanting words in it, it's quite similar to you taking things out. It's like you're just getting down to the form and music.
Because you use I'm right in saying you often use collage to begin the work, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that's in a way is the purpose of that because of the way that you want your painting to look eventually, or is it just so that you can use kind of images that already exist in the world just as a way to kind of start the process? If it was just a blank canvas and you and paint, do you think that would just make it too much of a kind of a leap forward, if you see what I mean?
Yeah. I think I at least I use it as a starting point. And then I think is for me like when I'm collecting images, I'm often drawn to like maybe one aspect of an image where it's like a texture or something like that, or a color, and then and so maybe like collaging helps me focus on those certain areas as well. So yeah, it's a starting point, and then I'll progress on that.
Just going back to this sorry, John,
I do it the other way around, where I start with nothing,
Yeah.
and then just like sketching, and then something will become something, and I'm like, oh, that's a frog.
Yeah.
And then I'll go and get an image of
Yeah.
the frog, and maybe think, okay, well, how is my frog? Like, is he like this? Like, is he
Yeah.
like that?
Yeah.
We're conjuring these things up.
Yeah.
It just kind of emerges. Going back to this idea of like maybe starting as being something that can evoke pressure or like fear or something. Do any of you have experience of working to quite a strict deadline to a commission if you have a show that's been upcoming or you have some kind of other commission? And how does that kind of change the process of starting when you think this has to be made by this point? Does it sort of exacerbate that situation? Does it make it much worse, or is it actually quite nice to have the kind of impetus to like start and just get it done?
I don't think it's a great idea to be too reactive to outside pressures like that. I think, but then I suppose obviously there's the logistical pressures of if you're usually the way you work is quite slow, then it does force you to maybe change and start a new approach to pictures. Like I found when I made I'd never made a series of work before, and then I had to make 20.
Yeah.
And suddenly because you can kind of dwell on one and get lost in one, and then suddenly but then when you're working on quite a lot, you have to be wary of the other ones. So I remember my mother-in-law, she used to be an illustrator, and it was actually a really good tool that she taught me. She used to do picture books, right? And so she used to start with the first illustration in the book, and then by the time the deadline got really tight, like the quality of the drawings just got worse and worse throughout the story. So then she was like, oh, maybe if I just do them in a random order, and then you won't tell which one was done first. And I like the idea of like not being able to tell which one. I find that quite interesting. Like they were all done at the same time, maybe, or like a few were done. I like the fluidity of paintings like that. Because you don't really know when they're finished.
Yeah.
You can just leave them and then work on them, the bare bones or something else until you get to.
Yeah, and that strikes me, I guess, as something that would help. Is having multiple on the go at once. So starting something new feels almost like part of a process of something else. So you never really feel like you're starting something completely new because it's part of a larger process. Which I guess for you, for the 2 years, for the sort of gap that you had out, that must have been because you didn't have that feeling. It was like really, I'm starting something new again now. That must have. I guess you had to sort of overcome that. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just thinking earlier that. Decision making is the hardest thing in starting something new. Like, do I do it large? Do I do it small? Do I do this? Do I do that? Or what colour do I use?
Yeah.
So many variables.
Yeah.
And I think when I started again, I just decided, okay, one colour. That's all I'm starting with.
Yeah.
No decisions to be made.
Yeah.
No variables. It's one colour.
Yeah.
And my canvas size. That was just like, okay, I just that feels right.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Sort of like getting rid of variables just to make it a bit easier. Yeah.
Did the ones that you did after that 2-year gap, did they like speak to the ones you'd made before? Was there any dialogue? They were totally.
I didn't think so. And then you said the thing about nighttime.
Oh yeah.
Earlier, which didn't come on the camera, but and I have always been like fascinated with like how the colours change at night time when you're sort of looking into the darkness and things that like come out of nowhere.
Yeah. You mentioned about like making decisions about big or small, which might sound really simple, but it kind of gets me onto one of the things that I wanted to think about, which is this idea of scale, which is that if you're starting a massive painting like the one we've got here, does that change the beginning process? Does it create more pressure, or does it create like maybe more freedom because you've got so many places that you can go with it, and the painting will just evolve so much more because it's going to take so much more time? So perhaps the initial pressure of starting is fine because the end result is going to be so different. So, and then on the other side of that is working on a small scale. does that feel easier starting? Does that feel like less pressure, or does it feel like the whole thing has to be more decisive because you're just working with less space?
Well, I mean, I think my process for both small and large scale always remains the same.
Yeah.
But I think the result, I guess, I mean, I enjoy both scales, I think, and of course, like large scale, I think I normally like the process of going back and forth it takes a lot longer to figure out. But I suppose I like my smaller work as well, and I think the results I normally like resolve them as such, like a lot quicker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you feel that scale? Does it change the way you start work?
Well, yeah, kind of like what Lucas was saying, the process is similar, but I think like the psychology is different. Like I feel like I can dominate a small picture.
Yeah.
Like really quick, like, do you know what I mean? In terms of like,
Little small canvas.
get on my side. No, I'm just like, I feel like you can dominate it in the sense that you can control, like in terms of, you can go from one side of the canvas to the other in just one swoop.
Yeah.
And you still have energy after that.
Yeah,
Whereas a large one, you really have to like go for it. And it's a lot more physical.
Like large scale is a bit more performative as well. You feel like you're really like getting into the canvas. It's that's a nice way of putting it.
Yeah.
I definitely feel like there is like a tussle or like a almost sparring, because you have to like really have more conviction.
Yeah.
Well, I do with a big canvas.
Yeah.
And also like, I don't know, always feel like with the large one there's so much pressure, especially like in art schools, they're like to make a big statement, of do something monumental on like a large scale. And I get that because obviously like the history of the Western art is all like, those great big allegorical whatever. But then I just thought it'd be nice to flip it. Like we'd love to do like a really big one, but of it kind of being about like nothing almost.
Yeah.
There is no allegory.
Yeah.
But then I feel like there a lot of time with small works there is such a there's a tendency for them to be quieter. Whereas the large ones, just by their size, they are a lot louder and performative.
And also on a bigger canvas, I feel like there's so many more details that come through. Like you notice so many little marks and that sort of affects the way you think. And for me, constantly resolving, like it sort of messes me up in a way. Like constantly trying to like fix areas and go back and forth with them.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about having you three is that all of you occupy a slightly different approach to painting. So Lucas, your stuff is kind of teetering on abstraction. George, your stuff tends to be a bit more surreal, I guess you could call it. And then Tom, your stuff is kind of a bit more there's a bit more of a direct relationship between the subject and the painting. And so I guess I'm interested in this idea of like how the relationship to the subject dictates starting a new work. So we were talking about this a bit, and you sort of said that despite the fact that it might seem like painting something out there in the real world would help the process of starting something new, because you have a sort of solid reference point. You said that actually painting on plein air poses many of the like maybe same issues that maybe starting an abstract painting or a more abstracted painting, the same sort of problems.
Yeah, I guess I feel like when I start anyway, I can't talk to anyone else, but it all it starts with like impulse, so like a direct, just like a darting view, like your eye to the thing, to the eye. So I guess maybe even in that sense it's different, because I think it's nice to have a reference, and then for me it's all about how far I can pull away from that initial thing, and then so it's about that relationship. And so those sort of whirling masses of colour or marks that I put down at the beginning don't necessarily really relate or are about having a topographical representation. They're more about like that feeling of seeing it for the first time.
Yeah.
and it's me just trying to make sense of it. So it's like, oh, just whether it's the way the light casts shadows in a certain direction, what time of day it is. And then you realize after you're doing all these things that they're so subject to change, and everything's in flux, and everything, there's no solidity really. And I guess in that sense it can be quite abstract because it depends where you are and when you are.
So the sort of boundary between painting real trees or real objects that are in the world and abstract painting is actually much more blurred, because they're both kind of unstable, because they're both constantly changing. You don't have, particularly if you're painting outside, the kind of constant flux of light or daytime, all of these kind of things.
It's about memory as well.
Yeah.
Whether it's like a memory of something specific or forgotten.
Yeah.
I guess with what I try and think of. But that's what I remember. Laurie Anderson, was chatting about memory, and she was saying that we have all this built up in-store memory that we don't even, that we're not cognitive. We're not aware of, and so when we see a tree, we're thinking it in relation to every other tree that we've ever seen, or every other, carpet that we've ever seen. And so our brain, it's amazing how much is going on that we don't or not aware of. So.
And do you feel like you're confident when you decide, okay, I'm going to be standing here, let's say you're painting a tree, or I'm going to be standing here, it's going to be this time of day, the light's going to be behaving this way. Do you ever feel like confident that you're like, okay, that's the decision, that's my orientation to the subject? Or does it always feel a little bit like it could be?
I think it's very tempting to do that, because then but then it's like, well, how far do you go? Like, do you need to be rigid?
Yeah.
But then that's the whole point. You're painting something that isn't rigid and it's fluid. So why not? So I try and think, why not I be fluid? And so I purposely, that's why the separate canvases are quite fun, because I can exploit the fact that I can move between each space.
Yeah.
Whereas something that's one large solid piece, I feel a lot more like everything has to relate to everything else.
Yeah.
That's whereas the separate canvases, I can take a break.
Yeah.
In that sense.
And also moving around the subject means you don't have to have that moment where you're like, this is the right perspective. It can be more kind of...
Yeah. They're all just different perspectives. Yeah. And it's just about experiencing space through time rather than getting the right or wrong perspective.
George, with your stuff, it's kind of, I guess, what you call a bit more surreal. This might sound like a silly question, but at what point would you say, because your paintings do have objects that exist in the world as sort of subjects, but they have a kind of surreal aspect to them as well. At what point does the surrealism begin to creep into the painting? Do you start with like just like quite kind of ordinary reference points and then sort of begin to change it, or is it kind of in the process of painting that object itself that perhaps maybe like a more surreal feeling or presence comes over the painting? What do you think?
I think the placement of the objects, because I'm playing with size, I'm drawing these tiny little, or these kind of really, really tiny port glasses are in 2 or 3 of my paintings and loads of my sketches. But I think the jump that makes them surreal is because I believe that the 2 port glasses of me and my nan.
Yeah.
So we're sitting on the bench or we're in the treehouse, and that's where the port glasses are. But the question that you asked earlier about what is your relationship with the subject and how does that affect the start? I think, this thing that's developed about it being in my nan's garden, this might be too deep, we might cut this out, but is that I feel like I should be at my nan's. I feel like I really need to spend time with her. So I am trying to be there in my painting. Because I'm painting her garden. And I guess that relates to what you were saying about manifesting where you want to be.
Yeah, definitely.
And that being a part of like world building.
Because so often I did a painting where it was like in the shape of a house of like this kind of like brambles almost, or like a wind tunnel, which was just like churned up by cattle and stuff. But it was all very lovely anyway. But I painted it in the shape of a house because I wanted to manifest the idea that I would like to live there one day or live in the countryside. So it was a kind of like painting to manifest your aspirations or desires or something. I feel like it's quite important for me anyway.
When you said that, I wanted to confess that I was obsessed with this video game. There was a little bit like Minecraft. You could build things. It was called Portal Knights, and me and my ex built this house that we kind of convinced ourselves that we lived in, because we were living in this most tiny place with no living room, and it was so cramped, and I was so desperate to have a place of my own that I built this house in the video game and believed I lived there. In my dreams I was there, like.
It's so easy to do that. Like my partner over lockdown, we were all living together, but yet she made a Sims version of it, like in the same house, the same family, the same individuals. And there's this like really strong desire, I guess, to like, I don't know, just try and exist in another space or how things could be, or
And then, well, I suppose sometimes when I'm like really into a painting as well, like when I'm thinking about a lot, so I'm sort of manifesting like the outcome of the piece, and sometimes like I try and like visualize the painting in my mind and how it's gonna look at some point in the future. And I mean, I'm normally that's like my sort of way of manifesting. I wouldn't say I'm like the subject I'm manifesting, because obviously I'm not. I'm more like abstract anyway. Like I think.
I think for you it's so much about the material, it's so much about the paint. So that makes sense why you'd think by that.
Yeah, I think is always just constantly thinking about this idea of like balance and the work and like rhythm, trying to make it flow or something like that.
And do you think that this, I might be completely wrong in this, but do you think that because your work does have like, it is abstracted, but it does still have that sense of a kind of real reference point or some kind of reality to it, do you think that the sort of like not going fully into abstraction, that thing that kind of just brings it back slightly to kind of an abstracted real reference point, do you think the fact that you don't want to go fully into abstraction is because leaving that reference point it would be a jump just like that's like too much away from making decisions that are based on something kind of concrete? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I still want there to be like, I still want like the viewer almost to have this, like, I want them to be able to like relate to the piece still, in a way, like have some sort of familiarity.
Yeah.
You want them to enter the picture.
Yeah. And so I wouldn't say I want to enter that space of being fully there's like abstraction and figuration going on, and but I'm really trying to like explore like how far you can go, how far you can push this idea, and that's why I like talking a bit about balance, because this is how I'm thinking when I paint, like how can one mark influence form, or I'm like really that's what I love doing, building form, sort of something maybe that starts off very abstract, then it evolves.
So like going back to this question of the blank canvas and the first mark, I guess the reason there's pressure, it's going to sound really obvious, but the reason there's pressure is because it can go wrong, and the first mark can go wrong, and things can feel like they just start in the way that you're not happy with. How often do you feel like when you start work, this is an open question, how often do you still feel like when you start a work that this is just not working, this one? And at what point do you know that that's the case? At what point do you think this one just isn't working for me? Is it within the first mark, or is it within kind of half the canvas is full? At what point do you start to think, this one isn't quite working for me?
Well, I think that is part of my process. Like a lot of the time I am getting frustrated with the work. But I think that now I've sort of accepted this part of the way I paint actually.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm sort of sometimes relieved if this happens earlier on. When I'm painting, because I know I know that as I'm going through that, the painting will progress from that, and it will be up only. But I think that is part of what I do.
Yeah, it's part of the process.
Yeah,
and something can go wrong.
Yeah.
I think it's part of everyone's process.
Yeah.
Well, does that mean you can just let it go though, because you have the flexibility to move things around and change things and push things back and pull them more forward? If you make a mark that you just don't like, you don't feel like you have to start all over again, because you know it's gonna progress. You can just push or pull or like.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I don't feel pressure with making a mistake as such. Like I think just trying to make it click into place, that's what's important. But
that rhythm.
Yeah.
I think you are meant to be quite frustrated during most of the painting process. I think that's important. I think so I've talked to a lot of artists about that, and the frustration thing is just always there, and they always talk about it, and they're like, there's like this, and you mentioned before, like you feel like it's like a battle, you're like fighting the painting, until you get to that point where you're like, I'm stop fighting you now.
Tom, do you ever give up on a painting?
Well, I was just thinking like what you mean by what I think of a wrong mark, because I feel like it's so interesting hearing you guys talk about that, because for me a wrong mark is a mark that doesn't express somehow some sort of inner feeling of the thing I'm depicting, right? So like if something I think of as something being very heavy, whether it's like very under a lot of strain or under a lot of weight, and I don't express that mark with how I feel that looks or feels to be under or in, then I think it's wrong. Or like, if there's like, if you're painting sky, for example, and it becomes so heavy and laden, somehow I'm like, oh, that's not how I'm seeing it. But then you realize, oh, it's not actually real life. It is just surfaces.
Yeah.
And so you have fun with it, don't you? I start to worry and get frustrated after a while when I start over intellectualizing, or when it becomes less about like you were saying about balance, Lucas. When I feel like that balance isn't there, this is when I'm.
So it emerges somewhere. It doesn't happen straight away after a bad mark or something.
Yeah,
it's a sort of gradual.
Because I know I can just get I can play over it, scratch it out. Or, And sometimes it's quite nice, like the whole like evidence of working out in a picture.
Yeah.
I think it's quite nice to see a little mark left over.
And what would it? I mean, I know that if we're working on canvas, obviously, most of the time you can't afford just to like scrap it, start something new. But what would it take? And this is an open question. What would it take for you to say, I can't carry on with this one? Like this has just been wrong from the start, or whatever. At what point do you think I can't go on with this? Like this has just not worked out. This one.
I think at that point, I know I said that I'm doing this in secret, but you've seen it before I showed anyone, and I was this isn't working. This I just don't feel great about this, and you just came in and said, well, just take that out. That perspective isn't right. Just like paint over that and paint over this and paint over that and change that whole wall out it. So I think when you reach that stuck point and you think I just want to start something new, it's really helpful to have somebody else come in and say, no, you can just redo that bit, because I mean maybe that will come more naturally to me the more I paint. But for now, that was a little bit of a moment for me where I was like, oh yeah, I could just paint over it.
It's an easy thing to forget, actually, that you can get easily lost again.
That you have control, and it's not controlling you. You don't have to give in to what you like the painting says that it needs according to the composition and the rules you've made, you can just change everything.
But I think it's so easy to get stuck into like a painting and sort of forget, forget about it. Like in terms of you're so immersed in it that you don't really realize like the simple things, and then sometimes it's important to get another perspective on, so like an outsider opinion on that, and make you realize like, oh yeah, like that does make sense.
You almost said developing a new end goal.
Yes, yeah.
Through that, well, also from having a break sometimes.
And the break is good. Yeah, it's like having an argument with someone. You know, having an argument with this painting.
Yeah.
I just need to. I mean, the only time I slashed a painting is when I painted someone. When it's someone. When it's like a person there.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Because I don't know why. I don't know. Yeah. Because you can kind of with a landscape or something that isn't existing next to you. I didn't know. I find someone. It's like it's not working. It's not.
Yeah.
I'm not depicting them.
Yeah.
Like I see them.
Yeah.
Whereas with the landscape, I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if a branch is here.
Yeah, that's.
Whereas, and I'm always aware of like, will they like it?
Yeah.
Will they think it looks like them? But that's something you have to get over, and like, because that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
To worry about that, but
So on the other end of things, there's this question of like the beginning going wrong, and the pressure of that. I was kind of wondering if any of you have an experience in the opposite direction, which is it's probably a complete cliche, but of the painter suddenly having a kind of flash of whatever you want to call it, inspiration or enthusiasm, and all of that kind of fear of starting a new painting being ironed out by this just kind of raw enthusiasm for something. Have you ever had that experience, the kind of tail end of just like needing to get to a canvas and start something new? Or is that a bit of a kind of myth that we like to just like chat about?
well, I love the beginnings. The beginnings are great because it's all about rhythm, right? And then, but when I started doing the multiple canvas ones, and it grows up, when you realize that you can just go anywhere and it's limitless,
Yeah.
that's quite exciting.
Yeah.
Because you're not trying to fill it all in. It's almost the other.
Yeah.
That's very exciting.
I think for me, because I'm doing that thing where I start and I'm looking at a relationship between two objects, I'll just keep doing in two objects until I go, oh, that relationship is just so real for me.
Yeah.
So when I hit the port glasses thing, I was like, well, it's got to be everywhere now. Like, la la la. And I think, I'm going to go through that again, just like looking at objects, thinking about the relationships between them, and then when it hits. So I guess like you're on the treadmill when you're sketching until something then you'll sketch something that makes you go, yep, this is a painting. I'm doing this now. But yeah, what about you? Because
Well, I think sometimes I'll like see something and think like, oh, I'm gonna have to bring that in like at some point to be in my paintings, or like use it as a reference or something like that. But I think it's just I mean, I still just approach the work the same, really. It doesn't change.
Yeah.
Colour's quite a big one.
Yeah.
You know, like seeing a colour somewhere, you're like, I need to have that.
Yeah.
Almost like a kind of like your way, not an explorer or like an ecologist, or like a archaeologist or something. You're like taking it back to the lab or something.
you do that. You so do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
And to do that.
I do. I always, if I see something, I'll come straight to the studio and try and bring it in when it's fresh, when you're really thinking about it. And I think that's like, you can see that in the work when it's something like natural that comes in, or
Be with your colour thing. If you've got like, you're taking a reference photo not just for the form of it, but you're like, oh, these colours make sense to me.
Yeah. Colours are important, definitely, in the work.
I was watching this thing on Instagram the other day, which was of the painter George Roy.
Yeah.
And someone asked him a good question, which is about the final mark that you make on a painting. So it's like, what's it? How do you feel about finishing a painting? And in the context of this subject, I kind of wanted to ask. What's more difficult, finishing a painting or starting painting?
Well, I don't believe it's the end, and that's what lets me have freedom with it, because
Yeah.
I think, oh yeah, it's not finished, I'll leave it, I'll move on to something else.
Yeah.
And I go, oh yeah, okay, that's done now, yeah.
So you sort of let it kind of.
Yeah, but if I thought if I actually believe, if I was thinking that was the final mark, I wouldn't be able to do it. I'd be like, no, this as well, and because I'm still frustrated with parts of it. So believing it's the final mark doesn't mark.
Well, there's that famous quote, I'm probably paraphrasing, which is like, a great poem isn't finished, it's abandoned. So to kind of, maybe I guess for some people, but nevertheless, maybe some of you feel like there is the kind of final moment, the moment that you're finishing a painting, where you can say to yourself, this is done. Do any of you have that?
I think finishing a painting is a lot harder than starting for me.
Yeah.
I think this idea of, like, when you start a painting, I think I know that I can go back into it, or like I'm pretty confident that I can work over these mistakes.
Yeah.
As much, whereas like finishing it, I mean, it's, you still go up this relationship with the canvas anyway, and you're almost like, by saying finish, you're letting it go, and that's like sort of a harder thing, a harder process to overcome.
And maybe it's silly to like quantify and compare, but which stage of the process feels like it needs to be more decisive, the beginning or the ending? Is
The ending.
First mark or the last mark the really decisive one?
The ending, I'd say.
Yeah.
I have a strange theory.
Go on. What's the strange theory?
I think, maybe it's because I'm obsessed with relationships, but when a relationship and you know it's done, because that was easier starting a relationship or ending one. Like, the thing is, like, you don't know that it's your final day, or if the relationship is over, it happened before you realised.
Yeah.
It happened before the last mark.
It did. It happened before.
Yeah.
So yeah, that last little bit is just. Is that too deep? Should we cut that out?
No, but you can finish a relationship amicably, like with a pain. You can be like, we're both coming to the end. That's final, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Whereas sometimes sometimes it's not amicable, and you're finishing it because you don't want to see it again.
Yeah.
You see? But then you don't see each other for a while, and then you see each other, and it's like, oh, I've really missed you. It's so nice to see you again. Let's continue.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the leaving it alone and coming back and you're like, I do like you. now that we've had some time apart.
Exactly.
And you're like, okay, let me just do one more little mark, and
That's it.
Like that last little mark is really nice.
Why did I do that? Why did I let myself get back into this relationship with this painting?
Yeah, and you ruin it. You're like, oh god, it ended really nicely, and now I've gone back into it and done too much.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I like that thing of like people realizing that finishing a painting isn't this kind of masterful moment of a final mark and everything comes together. That actually it can be about more practical things like energy, like the amount of paint you've used, the amount of time you spent on something, all of these questions.
Yeah, definitely. Because it's like an active performance, and it is like, you can equate it to all sorts of things. Like going on it has a finite.
Yeah.
So regardless of whether you want it to be finished or not, when there's a lot of artists who have unfinished paintings, but that's only because their lives finished before the painting.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I really like those unfinished. Like those old Turners, where they were all kind of.
Yeah.
I like all of those.
Yeah, they're always really fun.
There's a great book called Last Paintings, and it's just shows you all the last, and they're really interesting.
Yeah.
So it's really fun show.
Yeah.
I've got another silly question. Why are you filming me?